If you are looking for a speaker for your organization, look no further than Dr. Janice Fortman, an international speaker, award-winning author, and producer and host of Relationship Matters TV. What sets her apart is that she connects the heart of relationships with the power of communication and leadership. Dr. Jan's goal is not simply to inspire audiences for a moment, but to give them the insight and tools to transform the way they live, lead, and relate to others. Contact her at drjan@drjanisspeaks.com or 1-877-667-7325.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. It is Dr. Jan Fortman with Relationship Matters TV. And I'm speaking like this because we are under a tornado watch right now, and it is thundering outside, and it's gotten all dark and everything. I don't know. I'm talking like this, like, I don't know why. But anyway, welcome to Relationship Matters TV. And I'm going to jump right in with our guest because the other night I was on and all the power went out. So hopefully everything will be cool, calm, and collected. And as she said, I said about the winds and the tornado, she said, well, we'll just go with the flow. So I like that. We're going to go with the flow. So let me introduce Yaffah daCosta. Now, she was on last week, and in the continuation of our conversation with her, we will explore the enduring shadow of anti-Semitism from the Spanish and Portuguese Inquisitions to today's alarming global rise. So what we're going to discuss I have a conversation about what is happening in the world today and in the very, I would say, I was going to say near future, but I mean, just recently and just before, what is with this anti-Semitism? So let's welcome Yaffah back this evening. Hello, Yaffah.
Hi, Dr. Jan. Nice to see you again. Nice to be with you. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Well, and this is so important that I thought we have to bring you back. So let me tell you, my first question. You've lived the legacy of the Inquisition in your own family's hidden Jewish history. So how does that personal experience shape the way you view anti-Semitism in the world today?
Well, actually, once I found out that I was Jewish from ancestry point of view and the history of the Inquisition, I had to study the whole thing. I couldn't figure out why there was so much hatred for the Jewish people. Okay, so I want to share some of the things that I learned in that exploration, which I did for many, many years. Okay, but that's why. Because, for example, Jesus is quoted in the Gospels, okay, as saying you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And when he does that, he's quoting Leviticus 19:18. So the very first thing that popped out to me was, how did something called Christianity go from the first century of loving your neighbor as yourself, that was the teaching, to being hateful towards the Jewish people? I couldn't understand it. And I'm not saying all Christians hate the Jews either. Okay.
Right.
Surely not. But I wanted to understand this. Was there a transformation? I mean, what happened? And the thing that I learned, and I'm going to do some pretty high level things to share with people,
Okay.
is that what happened was, in the first century, Christianity was based on the Hebrew Bible, and it's quoting the Hebrew Bible a lot. But starting in the second century and also in the third century, there were a lot of former pagans, Greco-Roman people, who wrote things that were terrible about the Jewish people. And so by the time you get to the fourth century with Emperor Constantine, the emperor of the Roman Empire, he decided he wanted to make Christianity the Roman religion, the religion of the whole Roman Empire. But it was a different Christianity, because now, or by then rather, I should say, Christianity had become based on the writings of the church fathers in the second and third century. And people can read these writings online. They can go online and search Tertullian and Clement of Alexandria, Justin Martyr, Origen, or just search on church fathers and get a list of all of them, and read their writings for themselves. I mean, this is all available today. It wasn't available for many, many centuries, but it is now. So there's a big difference between the theology and the ideology, whatever you want to call it, of the first century Christianity, what that was, based on Judaism, to be honest with you, because he just wasn't just a Jew by his parents, by being a Jew born of a Jewish mother. The Catholics say he was a Jew by a Jew in the flesh, is what they say. But he was also a Jew in terms of Judaism, in terms of Jewish theology, and it was all Unitarian. It was all God is one. And he quotes that. He quotes Deuteronomy 6:4. He quotes the Hebrew Bible a lot, and so does Paul. So how did it happen that Christianity went from being based on the Hebrew Bible to being based on Greco-Roman writings and Platonism and all of this stuff? Now, at the outset, I want to explain and emphasize that I'm sharing historical information. These are historical facts, and people can, again, be a fact checker of what I'm saying and go look it up for themselves. And I encourage people to do that because it's all available online. And, what people believe is a personal choice from the free will that God gave every human being. So I'm not here to criticize what people believe, but to share historical facts so that they understand where this anti-Semitism comes from originally and the version of today, because the version today is different. I'm going to get to that. But I just want to do the historical facts first. So I mentioned again, first century Christianity. Those manuscripts that were written in the first century are very different. But the Bible, the Christian Bible, wasn't created until late 4th century, which is under the Roman version. Okay, and so things they put in the Bible, in the Christian Bible, was supposed to mirror or satisfy their theology of the 4th century, which was not that God is one, and which is not that a human being couldn't be God. That's what it was originally. But it changed because the pagan world worshipped human beings as gods all the time. They worshipped the emperor, for that matter. They used to burn incense to the emperor. And all the temples, the Greco-Roman temples, the pagan temples, had statues of Zeus and Apollo and all the Greek gods and the Roman gods. And that was the issue, that they needed to have those statues, and they needed to have gods that had some kind of physicality, which in Judaism we don't have. God doesn't have a human form, a human shape, a human image. Okay, he doesn't have any physical form or substance in Judaism. And the Greco-Romans couldn't handle that, couldn't deal with that, mentally. Their background and everything they had was based on a human form for gods. And so that was a huge, huge problem that the Greco-Roman church of later, a couple hundred years later, had to overcome if they were going to make Christianity the religion of the whole empire. So, and a few other things about Jesus. The modern Christian scholars, by the way, Christian scholars, understand that he was a Pharisee, Jesus, also Paul. That's a sect of Judaism in the Second Temple period. And moreover, that he followed what's called the teachings of the house of Hillel as compared to the house of Shammai. Now, that's a backstory to Jesus and to all the Jews of the 1st century that a lot of Christians don't know, and they're not taught about it. So when people read the Gospels and they see that Jesus of Nazareth is talking to Pharisees, air quotes, okay, based on the subject of what they're talking about or discussing or arguing or whatever you want to call it, you can tell that he is taking the position of Hillel on Jewish law against the position of Shammai. So the Pharisees he's talking to are actually Pharisees of the house of Shammai. Those were the arguments or discussions that were going on in that day, in the 1st century. People who don't understand that when they read the Gospels, they think he was against all of Judaism. And that's not true. He was a Jew of his day, arguing the points of halakha that were being discussed or argued that day. So it's one of the major things that people aren't taught, they don't understand. Now, the other thing about 1st century is Paul's communities were Judeo-Christian, meaning there were Jews in those communities and Christians. This is what the Gentiles were called. Jews were never called Christians. Okay, there was a sect of Judaism in that day called Nazarene Jews. Those were the followers of Jesus, and Jesus was the teacher. But they were called Nazarene Jews, and later called Ebionites in the history. It was the Gentiles that were called Christians, which, by the way, means a follower of the Messiah. And that's what they were called because that's who they were. They were Gentiles who were following the teachings of Jesus. To be a follower of Messiah, or the person in the 1st century they thought was the Jewish Messiah, and that's very true. They thought that in the 1st century, okay? So they were called Christians, Christos in Greek, okay? The New Testament writings were all in Greek. So it comes from the word Christos, which means a follower of Christ, which means Messiah in the Jewish world. Okay, but it was not all Christians. It was Jews and Gentiles, Jews and Christians in Paul's communities. And they did believe he was the Messiah. However, what happened was when he died, he was killed by the Romans, as you know, we talked about that last week. And once he died and did not fulfill the rest of the prophecies about who the Messiah is and what he does, then the Jewish people started to drop away from believing in him. And in the early second century, there was another claim to messiahship in a man named Bar Kokhba. And Rabbi Akiva, a very famous rabbi, believed that Bar Kokhba was the Mashiach. But then he was killed, and he didn't fulfill the prophecies either. And none of the other claimants or candidates for the Messiah didn't fulfill these same prophecies. None of them did. So once they died, they no longer are a candidate to be Mashiach or the Messiah, including Jesus. And he also was expected to come back in the first century in that generation, and he didn't do it. So over time, first couple of 100 years, 300 years, whatever, the Jewish believers in him as the Messiah started to back away, started from that belief, started to not believe that anymore, again, because he didn't fulfill the prophecies. But the Christians, the Gentiles, okay, who weren't as up to date on what the prophecies said about the Messiah, stayed holding on to that belief that he was the Messiah. And of course, the Roman Church promoted that belief as well. But they used it in a way, they used that belief in him as the Messiah and hold on to it, irrespective of the Hebrew Bible and the Bible prophecies about that. Now, they had to put the Hebrew Bible in the Christian Bible because the first century documents that were written quoted the Hebrew Bible all the time, so they couldn't not do that. And people can see these prophecies to this day if they read the Hebrew Bible in its original form, translated into English, or the Christian Bible. They can see the prophecies and what the prophecies said about what Messiah will do. And in Judaism, Messiahship is based on what he does. It's not speculation, and it's not about belief. It's about he fulfilled, whoever that person they think is, the Messiah. He fulfilled the prophecies of what the Messiah is supposed to do. So that's a big difference between Christianity and Judaism. But Constantine, okay, wanted to take Christianity and especially the social justice aspects of Christianity, which comes from Judaism, because Judaism was starting to be a very popular religion in that day. Because of this, the Roman social justice was practically non-existent. You had the elite, the Roman emperor, of course, and all of his entourage. You had the elite, people who had a lot of money, and the Roman soldiers, especially the generals and the higher ups. But then you had women, slaves, non-Roman citizens, foreigners, who were second-class citizens who didn't matter so much in the Roman world and the system of things. And that's why people were, in those days, attracted to Judaism, because Judaism said, no, everybody is the same to God. Every soul in the world is the same to God. God loves all of his creatures, everyone that he created, okay? And so that was very attractive, especially to women, because women were not appreciated at all. They were chattel. They were possessions of the husband, etc. Anyway, so Constantine had to overcome that, and the church had to overcome that. So what did they do? They adopted it, of course. Okay, and that's very good that Christianity has those social justice concerns about people, everybody. But they're not really taught that it comes from Judaism, so they can understand. And then secondly, Constantine was going to have a big problem in getting the pagans of the empire to accept a god, as I said, that had no physicality, and other things like pagan rituals and pagan customs and protocols. So a lot of those things got added into Christianity. So the pagans would feel more comfortable, more welcoming. As a matter of fact, Constantine's mother went throughout Judea and took pagan temples, converted them into Christian churches, and said, now, this is where Jesus was buried. This is where Jesus was persecuted on the Mount, and all those things. And she had no basis for that. It's just that she was, it's true, these are facts, historical facts. She just took pagan temples, converted them to churches in the Holy Land, okay, and said, well, this is the reason why it's a church now, because of X, Y, or Z, part of the history of Jesus, the narratives in the Gospels. So again, the emperors were considered gods, and in the New Testament writings, when Jesus is called Son of God, it has a Jewish meaning. because every Jew is a son or a daughter of God. But that also was a phrase that was used for righteousness and for someone like who would be the Messiah, because the Messiah is a very righteous person. So that's what was meant in the first century by Son of God. But in the Roman world, that got changed to God the Son. So if an emperor was the son of an emperor who had died, and the Roman Senate had voted and decided he was a god, he was deity now. He died, but he was a god. Okay, his son, who took the throne, would be called God the Son. So those two phrases got, or that phrase got, sort of converted into a Roman version of it. Okay, because again, the Roman emperors were worshipped as gods, which the Jews couldn't do. Okay, and the Gentiles in Christianity couldn't do it either. As a matter of fact, that's what got them killed. Caesar Augustus had allowed the Jews to not have to worship in pagan temples and not have to burn incense to the emperor and not have to do all of that. Imperial cult is what it's called. They didn't have to do all of that. Caesar Augustus, all the way back to the early part of the first century, he made that a rule in the Roman Empire. Leave the Jews alone. But for the Gentiles, no. They had to observe Roman law. And if they were not participating in the imperial cult and burning incense to the emperor and doing all these things under the paganism of that day, they were violating Roman law. The sentence was death, and they could be sent to the amphitheater with wild animals, killing them. Okay, that's the earliest Christian martyrs. That's why they were martyrs. Not because they believed in Jesus as the Messiah, but because they had stopped worshiping the emperor, and that wasn't allowed for non-Jews. Okay, so a lot of this goes back to the quotes of Jesus in the first century writings. Okay, people can see for themselves that Jesus was theologically Jewish. He observed Judaism. He taught Torah. He was a Torah teacher. And of course, today we call that person rabbi. All right. So how did the Roman version of Christianity affect the Jewish people that day? Well, they basically couldn't go along with it and haven't been able to go along with it ever since. And thus they've been persecuted for it. And that's what we call Jew hatred or anti-Semitism. It goes all the way back to the Council of Nicaea in 325 of the Common Era. That's early 4th century. And that's when it changed officially, that Christianity was going to be different and was going to be more oriented towards the Greco-Roman world and their background, which was anti-Semitic from way back, from 3rd century BCE. They had started to become hateful towards the Jewish people. And they brought that into Christianity. 1st century Christianity with Paul, okay, there was no hatred of Jews. It was a Jewish, non-Jewish community that Paul had. So that's a huge, huge difference between 1st century Christianity, which I call version 1.0, versus or compared to the Greco-Roman version, which I call version 2.0, which the Jews couldn't go along with. But they did go along in the 1st century with thinking he was the Messiah. He was a good candidate to be the Messiah. He had the credentials. At that time, they thought that he was the Mashiach. And then, of course, he was killed by the Romans. So that's how it happened. And what happened also was the Roman Church created what they call replacement theology, where they said, well, the church or Christians are now the new Israel or the real Israel, and God has abandoned the Jewish people. He revoked the covenant that he made with Abraham and Abraham's descendants. And because of that revocation of the covenant that they believed in, that's where the Jew hatred pops up, because people say, well, they're evil, they're wicked, they're this or that. They're quoting the church fathers. Okay, these are people who have been taught this, of course. We don't come out the chute hating anybody or loving anybody. A baby doesn't know hate or love. They have to learn it, right? So that's what people have been brought up to learn, if they were. Of course, not everybody was, to hate the Jews. Now, let me very quickly, and I'll answer any questions you have. Let me tell you about the current version of Jew hatred. It is because of the jihadis, the Muslims who are extreme. Okay, now, Christianity under the Greco-Roman perspective was extreme in killing the Jews and in persecuting the Jews, all of this stuff. They had become extreme. They were extreme for many generations with not just the Inquisition, but all kinds of persecution of the Jews all over the world. Then it stopped. It hasn't gone on for a long time. Okay. But now we have the supersessionism of the extreme Muslims, and not all Muslims are extreme. There are moderate Muslims. We see that now in the world with the Abraham Accords and other things that are going on. So not all Muslims are extreme either, but the ones who are extreme are called Islamists or jihadis. Here's what they decided. Before October 7, which was planned for a few years, October 7, 2023, when they came into Israel and attacked the what's called the envelope, the communities of Jews in Israel, the southern part of Israel that are around Gaza. When they breached the border fence and they came in, that was planned for many years. But the other thing that was planned was the propaganda war. And propaganda is one of the four tools of cancel culture of the Romans. This goes all the way back to the Romans. Okay, so what did they plan? They planned for those protests on campuses. Immediately, the very next day after October 7, there were protests on various college campuses that were they claimed they were pro-Palestinians, but they really were, and it came out later very clearly, they were pro-Hamas. They were in favor of terrorism against the Jews and against Israel, wanting to cancel Israel, wanting to do away with Israel, destroy Israel, and kill all the Jews. These are the Islamists. Well, college kids, I'm sorry, they love a good protest. Okay. I remember my college days, so I laugh. But they're not very smart, and they weren't very well educated about the whole history of Israel with the Palestinians. The Palestinians had been, especially Gaza, but also the PA, have been radicalized over the years by the UNRWA, UNWRA, this UN organization that was responsible for their education. And they've been teaching children for many, many years to hate Jews. It's in their school books. It's in their curriculum. We know this. We have proof of all of this. So what happened was the Islamists not only wanted to attack Israel, okay, and not only that, and have Hezbollah go along and Iran go along and the Houthis, okay, they wanted a 5 or 6 or 7 front war, which they didn't get. But they wanted a propaganda war also to turn the world against Israel. And what they're doing is they're using the Romanism of Christianity, the people who don't understand this history, even of Christianity, and I'm sorry to say this, but it's true, using them as useful idiots because they're not educated about this whole history, to go along with the Islamists that Israel shouldn't exist. And Israel shouldn't be a Jewish state. There's no reason why the Jews had to come back. They don't understand the prophecies. This was also teaching of the Roman Church for many years, that the Jews, because God abandoned them and revoked the covenant this is the teaching, because God revoked the covenant with Abraham and Abraham's descendants. Now, you can go and kill the Jews because they're wicked, they're evil, they're this and that, okay? This is what the teaching is. So what Christians don't understand is, based on that teaching, they're claiming God is a liar. Because in the book of Genesis, the first book of Moses, God makes an eternal covenant, not just a covenant, an eternal covenant. Now, if God is omniscient, all-knowing, all-powerful, all-everything, and if God knew this was true, and God knew that later in history, he would revoke the covenant, and he would do away with the covenant and choose different people, okay, to be his ambassadors, his chosen ones, whatever. Then when he tells Abraham earlier on that it's the eternal covenant, it means God lied. That's what they've been taught. They haven't been taught that full on in their face. But they've been taught that because that's the logical conclusion to the teaching that God abandoned the Jews and they no longer have a covenant with him. But God said it was eternal. And God further said in Isaiah, if they read the Hebrew Bible and they read the prophets, they know that God said he will never abandon them. He can't, because he made a vow to the Jewish people at the Akedah. When Abraham goes to sacrifice Isaac, and God stops it, God sends an angel to stop it, okay? He makes a vow that he is going to be the God of Abraham's descendants. It's a vow. Do you know how serious a vow is to God? You cannot break a vow. It's a very serious sin. So, wait a minute. That means that God broke his vow? He can't. He's the one who says a vow is so. So, this is so miscombobulated. Okay. But when people are taught that God revoked his covenant with the Jewish people, the descendants of Abraham, that's what they're being taught to believe, that God is a liar, even though consciously they don't have those words in their mind. That's exactly what's going on. How can they believe in a God that lies? Why wouldn't God lie to them and someday change his ambassadors, if you will, to some other group, not Christians, but like maybe the Muslims, which is exactly what happened, by the way. The Muslims decided, because of the Prophet Muhammad, that not only were the Christians correct that God disavowed the Jews as his people, the Christians were incorrect that God has a covenant with them. So they're against both the Jews and the Christians. Their mantra is first the Saturday people, then the Sunday people. In other words, to the extremist Muslims, first you kill the Jews and get rid of them, then you get rid of all the Christians. Okay? Because to them, to the radical Muslims, both the Christians and the Jews are infidels, okay, and have to be slaughtered, like they're doing in Nigeria. With not too many people speaking out against it, by the way, who support Christians in Nigeria that are being killed. This is what's going on today. It's an adaptation of Jew hatred and anti-Semitism, okay, from the Muslim world, and they're trying to drag some of the Christians into this hatred of the Jews, that they shouldn't be in the land. It never should have happened. The church had that in there, so the Jews would never come into the land. So they're using these people who've been so poorly taught about church history from the Romanism, not first century, they don't teach really the first century part, and the radicalized Muslims, jihadis, are using that Jew hatred to try to turn the entire world against the Jews. And that's the propaganda. So I'm here to explain that's the
Well, you have given me and this audience a history. And, well, of course, we are not taught that. So we haven't studied that. So we don't know. And I think a lot of anti-Semitism, even today, like what you're saying to us, they don't even know where it came from. They just do it. You know what I'm saying? So
it's a mind blower. It's a mind blower.
It is. It is. So how does, I saw something that you said about replacement theology. Is this what you're talking about? Is this the same thing that you're saying now?
It's called two different things. It's called supersessionism, that the church superseded the Jews, because the Jews, their covenant had been done away with. So it's called supersessionism also for Islam. It's called supersessionism, that Islam did the same thing. Okay, superseded Christianity. It's called that, and it's called replacement theology. Christianity said Christians are now the new Israel, okay, because the Jews have been done away with by God. Islam said the same thing because of what Muhammad wrote in the Quran. Okay, now the Muslims have replaced the Christians who had replaced the Jews. So it's both the extremists now. I'm talking about the extremists because there are Muslims who are moderate. There are Christians who are moderate who don't believe in this stuff. Okay,
yeah.
But it's the radical ones that believe in this, and they're the ones that are promoting the anti-Semitism. When you you look at people like Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, I'll name them, Nick Fuentes, and those types of people as social influencers, okay, as their social media platforms, they are doing the same thing. They are, without using that terminology of replacement theology, that is what they are promoting. That Jews shouldn't be in the land. And oh, by the way, if it really is Jews in the land, so they doubt, first of all, they doubt that the people who are here in the land are really Jews. That's one way to do it. And that's why it needs to be destroyed, because they're not real Jews. But the other way to look at it is, well, they're real Jews, but they shouldn't be in the land because God revoked his covenant with them and all this other replacement theology stuff. And so they never should have come into the land. Therefore, the Jewish people being in the land today is an anomaly. It never should have happened because they're not God's people anymore. They're not God's covenant people because of this thing that's taught that God revoked his covenant with the people, even though God said it was eternal and he made an oath. See, they don't know that. They're not taught that. And if Christians don't read their Bible, and I mean the whole Bible, both the New Testament writings of the first century, even the terms New Testament and Old Testament is Roman, because they wanted to say the Hebrew Bible is done away with. So they don't want to call it the Hebrew Bible. They want to call it an Old Testament and the first century writings. And even that nomenclature is Roman. That's how they canonized their Bible. But if Christians read and really read and study and have a good teacher, those writings, they'll be able to see it easily for themselves that God never abandoned his people and said that in Isaiah, that he would never. And by the way, this third temple, the temple that's coming, and the Mashiach himself, whoever that will be, okay, they'll have a third temple, and Isaiah in chapter 56, verses 6 and 7, God calls it, that's what he says, it's God's word. A prophet says the words of God that God told him to tell the people. It's not his words, it's God's words. So it's God speaking. In Isaiah, he says it's a house of prayer for all the nations. It's not just for the Jews. And the world of the Messianic era is for the whole world, not just the Jews. Okay, so people who are against the third temple coming and all of what's supposed to happen when the Mashiach gets here, again, whoever it is, okay, it could be Jesus. I'm not saying it wouldn't be. I'm just saying a person can believe whatever they want. But aside from factually, from the Jewish perspective, the Jewish Messiah is the one who fulfills those prophecies. And nobody has done that yet. So it's speculation. It's actually speculation. And people can speculate whatever they want. What's happening with anti-Semitism is Jews are being persecuted for not believing in anybody as the Mashiach until a person comes and fulfills those prophecies. That's what we're being persecuted for. Because the church, with replacement theology, wants us to believe it's Jesus and become Christians. That never happened in the first century. Jews weren't told they had to abandon the Torah and they had to join a Christian, a non-Torah thing, a non-Hebrew Bible. No, it was only about the Hebrew Bible in the first century. So this is where people get stuck and they're not being taught. They're not being taught correctly the history. That's the issue, church history. They're not being taught the church history. Now, if they learn it on their own, great. And then they decide what they want to do with that information. I'm not telling people what to do with that information.
So what are the steps that both Jews and non-Jews can take to combat anti-Semitism effectively? What are the practical steps?
They need to learn church history. They need to learn the things that I've been sharing, and there's much, much more. Okay, because there are many things that the Romans changed so that the pagans would be more comfortable with this second version of Christianity. The Christmas tree, worship of trees, was common in paganism.
Yeah, we know that. I think we all know that.
Okay.
That's paganism. And plus, we put a a star on top of it.
Okay. There are other pagan holidays that the Romans wanted to keep, like Saturnella. Nobody knows when Jesus was born, except the narrative says the shepherds were out at night with the sheep. That wouldn't have happened in December, not in Israel, not in Judea. So nobody knows when he was born. The speculation is that it was probably more like around the time of Sukkot, where the shepherds are out with the flocks at night. Okay. So they picked a date, and the date they picked happened to be a pagan festival called Saturnella. Okay. So they got to keep one of their pagan holidays, and others as well. So they kind of wove that in to the Roman version of Christianity, those pagan observances. And the whole thing of worship of a human being as God is not Jewish, it's not Torah. It's the opposite of Torah. So at the Council of Nicaea, when they decide that Jesus is not only God, he's co-equal with the Father, that's absolutely against the Torah, and Jews can't go there. So because we can't go there, and we can't have that belief, it's totally against the Torah. For us, it's idolatry. The worship of anything in this world that God created, anything or anyone that God created, okay, is idolatry, because it takes worship away from the Creator himself, which is what Judaism is. So because of the beliefs that we have, which run counter to Romanism, not to the first century. We're not counter the first century. Our beliefs are counter to Romanism of the second, third, and fourth century. Because of that, we got persecuted for many hundreds of years by the church.
Let me say something, just to clarify something. So are you saying that if you worship Jesus, who was a man, that is idolatry? According to
the Hebrew Bible, God is one and there's no other. That's a quote from the Hebrew Bible. Okay, many times it says that in the Hebrew Bible, by the prophets, by Moses. Okay, he's one. He's echad, which is the word for the number one. Like if I go to the market and I say, Ani rotza, I want, echad, one of those. That's how I say the number one. It's the numeral one in Hebrew. You know, you can count in Spanish and Portuguese and Italian, all these different languages, and they all have a word for the number one. Well, that's what God is in Judaism. God is one. He's not divisible. You know, he can't be dispersed. He can't be divided into multiples. That's Judaism. So the people who are persecuting the Jews, part of it is because they don't believe that. They believe something else. But wait a minute. Where in the New Testament, where in the first century Christianity, does it ever say Jesus is God? It doesn't. Jesus doesn't claim he's God. Paul doesn't claim he's God. Jesus is worshiping God the Father, which is what we call God, God the Father. He had this famous prayer. How do you pray to God? He never asked people to pray to him. There are no stories in the narratives of the Gospels where his disciples are praying to him or worshiping him. None of that. None of that existed in the first century. If people really read their Bible, they'll see it for themselves in the Gospels and in Paul's writings. In the first century, nobody calls him God. He didn't explicitly. Now, there are things he said that people take to mean he's God. It's an interpretation of what he said, but it's not explicit that he ever is quoted as saying he's God. And that's what people will find out if they actually study their own Bible, their own Christian Bible. It's all there, meaning it's not there that he claimed to be God. That happens later with the Romans. Okay. It's a big, huge thing.
Okay. So what we are taught, he's the Son of God. You know.
But that in Judaism meant something different from God the Son, meaning he's the third part of a Trinity and all of that. The Trinity, the first time the word Trinity is used is in the late 2nd century by Tertullian. He's the first one that mentions the Trinity.
Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Yeah. In the first century, they didn't have that construct of a God that had three persons. That did not exist in the first century. It was all the Hebrew Bible. That was their belief system, was Judaism, for not just the Jews, but also for the Christians of the first century, under Paul's teachings, only one God. That's a big, huge difference between the first century and the fourth century, what became Christianity of the fourth century. Okay, it developed into that. By the way, the Jews were backing away from belief in Jesus as the Messiah, even because he didn't fulfill the prophecy. So I think I've gone through that enough. But they never believed in him as God. Not the Nazarene Jews, not the Ebionite Jews, not any of the Jews ever believed he was God in the first century. But that's clear in the Gospels. It's very clear. But people aren't taught this. You know? People are not. And so the first time they hear it, and the first time when I was studying this, I said to myself, come on, wait a minute. Come on. So I've studied this for 50 years. It took me a long time, okay, to finally understand this switch that the Greco-Romans did, starting in the 2nd century. Most people don't know about it.
Well, let me tell you. I'm like, this is a history lesson. And Maxine Walker says, what a history lessons. You know, yeah. Okay. So
now here's another thing. Let me give you another one.
Quickly, because we got 10 minutes.
Okay. The missionaries who come to Israel, but any missionary, they don't have to come here, who want to convert Jews to Christianity. What they say is, and this comes from the Roman version of Christianity, what they say is, if you don't believe that Jesus of Nazareth is the Messiah, you're going to hell. Okay? That's part of what they teach. All right. That's classic Roman Christianity. But if you go into the Gospels, and if you do a search, and this is all powerful, this is all possible today with the tools of today, with AI, with whatever you want, with just a regular search engine search. If you look at every place in the Gospels where Jesus is quoting hell, when he uses the word hell or Gehenna, whatever it is, it's not about that at all. He never says people have to believe in him as the Messiah or they're going to hell. It's not there. It doesn't exist in the first century writings. When he talks about hell, he's talking about unrepentant sinners and rebellion against God. People who are rebelling against God, doing whatever they want, violating God's law, even the moral code. The Christians were taught this too, but it was at the level of the moral code that they had to observe. Not that they had to observe the Judaism of Mount Sinai, of the whole Torah that was given at Mount Sinai. Okay? No. It's just rebellion against God and his will. That's what sends people to hell. According to the first century writings, anytime Jesus is quoted as using the word hell, that's what he's talking about. Now, people can go and search this on the internet and search for the word hell, and especially Jesus using that term. And it's got nothing to do with people have to believe in him as the Jewish Messiah or they're going to hell. But that's what the missionaries tell people. And it's not true. He never taught that. Okay?
Okay. All right. So
people should look it up. Don't trust me. Don't believe me. I'm serious. They should look it up for themselves and learn this stuff for themselves. And why the anti-Semitism got started to begin with was because the Greco-Roman world had nothing to do with the first century. They were not anti-Semitic. There were Jews in Paul's communities. It wasn't
so do you believe that right now, let's say today, without being aware of any of that history, and you take, like you say, college students or young people or even people who have not read the Bible, or people, non-Jewish people, they don't know all of this history. Why do you think quickly, why do you think that they are involved in anti-Semitism?
That's what they've
And they
been
know
taught.
none of this.
That's what they've been taught.
They just been taught to
It's
hate
also
the Jews.
it's even culturally Christian. Even people who aren't necessarily church-going Christians, but they also don't read the Bible. Okay, even from a cultural point of view, there's anti-Semitism. Like there's racism. There are
Yeah,
people who were
it's
raised to be racist. Okay, but then there are people who are culturally racist.
yeah,
If you know what I'm saying, okay?
yeah,
So it's a part of the Western culture, has become part of the Western culture. The Romans were also, by the way, racist. They had terrible things to say about African people. Really, very bad. Okay? And it was also because of this fear of the stranger, fear of somebody who looked differently or act differently or thought differently or whatever, okay, and fear of them. Okay? So that's where that all started. But that all started also with the Greco-Romans, the racist part also. But with the Jews, it wasn't so much racist, it was more theology and ideology.
well, Yaffah, you are a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of historical facts. I'm going to have to start reading. Well, being a Christian and all, going, we don't focus on the Old Testament. We focus more on the New Testament. But I think I'm going to really start reading the Old Testament also. But it's almost like you could be here 3 or 4 times because we don't have any more time.
Oh, let's do it. No, let's do it. I'm happy to do it because this needs to be taught. This needs to be explained to people so they can understand.
Because I never knew, like, and I'm gonna say this right quick, because when we think about anti-Semitism and the persecution of the Jews, we think of Hitler. We don't go all the way back. And I hope people will watch, if they didn't watch the first episode with Yaffah, I hope you watch the first episode. And if you want to watch this one again, of course, it would be great. Watch this one again, because then she goes back even further with a lot of historical facts. So, Yaffah, thank you so much for being my guest. And I have to digest a lot of what you said. And then I will definitely have you back. But I must say to my audience, the tornado siren is going off here. But I still see this big dark cloud, but the tornado siren stopped.
Okay.
So hopefully it's gone, it's over. And because we were afraid that, we were going to go zoop and you all wouldn't see this anymore. But Yaffah, again, thank you so much for being my guest.
Thank you very much.
And continue to send me stuff via email, because I watch the videos and I read stuff because it is educational.
Okay, excellent. Well, I'm an educator. That's who I am. So
I know.
That's what I do.
I know. So for everyone, we're going to leave Yaffah who is in Jerusalem right now. It's 4 o'clock, almost 4 o'clock in the morning there. So again, Yaffah, you stay in touch, and thank you so much.
I will. Bless you. Bless you. And all the pro-Israel, pro-Jewish people in the world, Christian or whatever, Muslims, there are Muslims who are pro-Zionist, pro-Israel. Bless all y'all, as we say in Texas. And
thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye. Wow, this has been great. This has been 2 history lessons. I got a little thing about Jesus, but I've been taught certain ways. So anyway, but it's been fascinating. So I want to thank all of you all who tuned in, who watched Relationship Matters, because guess what? There are all kinds of relationships and all kinds of relationship matters. Life is about relationships. But what I do want to tell you is this: I will be speaking at the Gatherverse XR Evolve Summit. I'll be part of a roundtable, a part of a panel. It's on June 23rd to June 24th. I will give you more information about it because it's virtual and I would like you all to come in. It's all about AI. I guess I'll be able to contribute. I do know a little bit. So anyway, it's been a plum-pleasing pleasure, as the old folks used to say. And seeing all of you all, thank you again for watching Relationship Matters TV. I will see you again next week on Relationship Matters TV. Take care. Be careful. Be blessed. Bye-bye.